It's now my very great pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel of pilgrims and scholars. One of the beauties of video conferencing is that we have the opportunity to invite speakers from anywhere. And we've taken advantage of that by assembling a group of 3 people who join us from 3 different countries. And before I introduce them, I just want to explain how this is going to work. So first of all, we'll have a chance to listen to our 3 panelists as they explore and open up the idea of what it means to be a pilgrim in 2021. And then once the panel has been speaking for about half an hour, it'll be your turn. So then if you have questions for any of our panelists, you should type your question into the Q&A. And our group of volunteers are going to collect all the questions and relay them to me. And I'll pose as many of them as possible to the panel as time permits. We're expecting a very rich and thoughtful conversation as we explore what it means to be a modern pilgrim responding to ancient callings. Just a reminder that we are recording this panel discussion, and I'm sure that you will be pleased to hear that we intend to make it available on our YouTube channel after today's events. It might take us a few days to get it edited and up on the site, but it will be there. And our speakers have also created a wonderful handout with the links to the various videos and podcasts and websites that they're going to be talking about in this meeting. And that handout will be available on our website, and we'll send you the link following the webinar once we get it put up on the site. I could go on at some length introducing these 3 speakers. They all have extensive experience of the Camino. They've all contributed to the literature around pilgrimage. But I know that you're as anxious as I am to hear what they've got to say. And so I'm just going to leave you to read the bios that were circulated on the website and the brief points on the slides that follow, and to learn more about each one of them as they speak. So to begin, I will invite Matthew Anderson to turn on his video camera. Welcome, Matthew. Scholar, professor, researcher, podcaster, and pilgrim who joins us all the way from Nottingham in English. So welcome, Matthew Anderson. George Greenia. See you there, joining us from Virginia in the United States of America. George is a professor, a scholar, a writer, a knight, the only knight on our panel today. Welcome, Dr. Greenia. And Mony Dojeiji. Many of you already know Mony. Hi, she's a CCoP member and previous presenter at some of our earlier events. And among her other accomplishments, Mony is an experienced television and radio host who's going to use those skills today to moderate as well as participate in the discussion that we're about to hear. So with that, over to you, our 3 pilgrims, Mony, George, and Matthew.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lee. I know that I speak on behalf of this panel when I say that it is an absolute honor to be here and to share some thoughts, some reflections on what it means to be a pilgrim today. You know, I think it's pretty safe to say that this past year has brought about a lot of upheaval. You know, many of us who planned to walk have found that our plans have pretty much gone out the window. We find ourselves in unfamiliar territory, really, with a lot of unknowns and unsure of how to respond or even to move forward. This situation has probably brought up for many of us a lot of emotions and has really forced us to reflect on some things that perhaps in the busyness of our everyday lives, we simply never stop to consider. Now, for those of us who have walked before, we may see an awful lot of parallels to being on pilgrimage, where everything that maybe we expected and that we planned is now completely up in the air. So how do we manage all of that? All of these emotions, all of these things that are happening around us that seem beyond our control? Are there any lessons that we can learn from pilgrims and from times past so that we can walk with greater confidence and trust and faith in pilgrimage's future? Now, I know that Matthew and George have a lot to say, and so I'm gonna go to George first and say, George, do you wanna share some of your thoughts on what it means to be a pilgrim?
Well, sure. Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be here. And I gotta say, you guys run a nice meeting. That's pretty impressive.
I
I'd like to
agree.
make just 2 points about modesty and mountaintops. And I'm not going to tease our Canadian friends, I'm from down in the United States, about modesty. But I do want to say something about mountaintops as well. Our theme is what it means to be a pilgrim in 2021, when we can't travel anywhere, let alone to Spain to walk the Camino de Santiago. We're stuck at home with nothing, well, frankly, concrete to brag about. And so we lapse into what I think, forgive me, is misplaced modesty. We become squeamish, talking up our enthusiasm for the Camino de Santiago. Gosh, let alone pilgrimage in general. But we're afraid that it's a pocket passion, not all that different from those in love with model trains or NASCAR races or quilting. But worse yet, when it comes to trumpeting pilgrimage, which makes us sound scary pious, eager to sell a plastic Jesus or a St. James out of the trunk of our car. I think that modesty, though, is misplaced. And here's why, using another example. I have a former student, Jacob, who's a high pointer. This is an American organization, okay, and obsession about climbing to the highest geographical point in all 50 of our states. Some high points, like the one in Florida, stands at a majestic 345 feet above sea level, or Rhode Island at, okay, 810 feet. Those are really easy. Others like Mount Hood in Oregon are over 11,000 feet. And we're talking teams with pitons and ropes. Charles Mound in Illinois is on private property and only accessible to the public 6 days a year. So those days it's mobbed. Jacob will be among them this year, hopefully his 37th or 38th high point. There are about 5,000 members of the High Pointers Club in the US, sort of the same number as the Canadian company or American Pilgrims. These enthusiasts have an active website, travel and meet up, trade stories about memorable expeditions. Sound familiar? Even call their journeys to high points pilgrimages. I get it. Jacob's passion for high points has become a check and a counterbalance for me about what I write on world pilgrimage in multiple traditions. How is a pilgrim community, our pilgrim community, different from a NASCAR gathering or a gun club? What are the behaviors of bonding versus integrative aloneness? A stamp on a single soul versus pulsing with a throng? How durable is the memory of the moment? How recoverable in retrospect? Is pilgrimage both the umbrella category and the most exquisite example? So there's no need for us to be modest about our real pilgrimages to Compostela or elsewhere. We are public interpreters of what pilgrimage can mean in history and in the modern world. Sacred travel is timeless and now more accessible than everywhere in the world and to every class of society. Yeah, pilgrimage is a runaway metaphor, and there's lots of travel that gets called pilgrimage. But we are, in a sense, custodians of the real deal that others measure their travel experiences against. There's healing and self-reckoning, but also welcoming strangers. And gosh, seeing ourselves become the conspicuous object of the charity of others. That's what we carry home. And that's why we stay pilgrims forever. Gosh, even in 2021, when apparently we're not going to travel much at all. Mony, back to you.
You know, that you bring up a lot of excellent questions and a lot of a lot of things to consider that I want to come back to, because those are a lot of questions. And yeah, I think they definitely invite a lot of introspection. So I want to come back and see if we can maybe expand on those a little bit. But I want to turn it over to Matthew for now to maybe share some of your thoughts, Matthew, on what it means to you to be a pilgrim.
Thank you. It's good. It's really, really good to be here. And as George said, an honor. And I'm going to ask George not to change his background for the next little bit, if that's all right, because I'm going to use that background. You don't need to get out of it. I just want to be able to see the background. So welcome. I'm really, really pleased to be here, and greetings from England, from Nottingham in the East Midlands in England, where it's nighttime. It's 6:30 p.m. here. I guess I want to pick up on some of the things that George said and just basically say, from one pilgrim to all of you who are out there in the Canadian Company of Pilgrims, it's interesting to sit in on the meeting and to hear I heard a couple of things really, really loudly in the AGM. One of them is we really miss the Camino. And that's understandable. We really, really, really miss the Camino. And of course, it's interesting, and a medievalist like George will be able to tell you much more about this, but this is hardly the first time that there's been a desire to be on pilgrimage during a pandemic. In European history, for instance, there were often pandemics and there was often pilgrimage going on at the same time. But in our lifetimes, this is the first time this has been so frustrating. And so I heard that frustration in the annual general meeting. But I also heard something interesting, which was, what can we do? What can we do? How can we adapt? How can we do something for the people, for the businesses, the albergues and the gîtes along the way? And how do we still maintain community during this time? And so that's my particular interest. Some of you may know or may not know. Part of the reason that I asked George to keep that background on is that when you look at that background, most of you in Canada, when you look at that background, you probably think Meseta or some part of the Camino, and that's what it is, I'm sure. When I look at that background, I see a corner of Southwest Saskatchewan Treaty 4 territory, south of Shaunavon, which is right just north of the American border, and a place right beside a little tiny white church called White Valley Lutheran Church that I walked on for about a month in 2015 that looks, frankly, an awful lot like that. I think being Saskatchewan and being August, the fields were not the same color, but the general flow of the land was roughly the same. And one of the things that a pandemic does, or could maybe do for us, is that it allows us to refocus on what's local. Because we're stuck. And so I have that podcast, Pilgrimage Stories from Up and Down My Staircase, because it's local. It's up and down the staircase, trying to stay in shape as we are doing in our backyards or in our neighborhoods or in local parks. But also what's local for you might be, if you're in Saskatchewan, might be Treaty 4 walks along that grid road, what we would call a grid road in Saskatchewan. And the reason, of course, they're called grids is that Saskatchewan is one of the few places where the surveyors just went straight. They just went absolutely straight. And in fact, you have things called correction lines in Saskatchewan. And I always grew up hearing about correction lines, not knowing what they meant. But a correction line is where the road is so straight that if you kept going straight, you'd go right off the surface of the planet. And so what they have to do is adjust for the fact of the curvature of the earth. And so a correction line happens every few miles. And that moves the grid road over to allow for the fact that the earth has curved. Now, when you walk a trail like it's right behind George in Saskatchewan, say, or in New Brunswick, along the New Brunswick Acadian, the Coast Trail and Fundy Trail in New Brunswick, or the Camino Nova Scotia, or the Route des Navigateurs in Quebec, or from Ottawa to Montreal, or in British Columbia, the Pacific Coastal Trail. You learn something about the local places and you learn something about the local people, and that always means Indigenous people. And so that's an area too that I hope that we can learn something about by reframing sometimes, if we have to, especially reframing our walks more locally. What does that mean about people who've been here for 10,000 years before us? So I'm interested in all of those topics, and I'll hand it back to you too, Mony. But thank you, George, for keeping that back screen on.
Yeah, it's you two bring up a couple of interesting points, because I think the definition of a pilgrim is often really tied to the Camino. And we think that being a pilgrim only happens when you go on this specific pilgrimage. And during this time, especially obviously a pandemic, I want to explore what it means to truly be a pilgrim, not just on the Camino. And if there are other places that we can explore, not just externally, but also internally, because for me, being a pilgrim is also a state of being, not just merely, the places that you go and the sacred places that you visit. And I'll use that kind of to launch into a little bit of kind of how I see being a pilgrim. And, I sometimes wonder if I chose to be a pilgrim or if kind of it chose me instead, because I really had no idea what being a pilgrim was. I had absolutely no context for it. But I do vividly remember the day that I was standing at the bookstore and I was looking at the cover of this white book and seeing the profile of a woman with a walking stick who was wearing a hat and carrying a backpack. And I remember just my heart beating so hard in my chest when I picked up that book, and I knew that was me. And that book was Shirley MacLaine's book, My Camino, and it would be the book that would introduce me to this, world of being a pilgrim. And I really had no clue. I had no clue what that was. But something more ancient, something more ancestral obviously did. And it brought me right to that spot to rekindle the memory of it. And so for me, it is that which is, beyond the logical, rational mind that pulls us, to connect with something that just feels vaguely familiar, but that we've somehow forgotten about, what and who we truly are. And we go on that quest, we go on that pilgrimage to figure that out, and to remember what it is that we have somehow lost sight of. And, my modern mind, like I'm sure the minds of many who are listening and watching, it wants to plan and to control every part of the journey there. And I can say that for me personally, the hardest part of the journey was not to plan and to allow that which was calling me to lead the way, and to trust that somehow it knew better than me where I needed to go and where I needed to stop and the experiences that I needed to have. And the Camino really for me was the place to practice all of that, to practice listening to that inner voice, that inner guide, that inner teacher that I came to understand was actually wiser than me and had a perspective that I could never have on the situation I was in, and how to be, present and aware. And had I not done that, I don't think I would have been ever able to walk to Jerusalem, because, there were no outer guideposts to show me the way, no yellow arrows, no guidebooks, no websites, no meetings like the one we're having right now. And so the question, became for me when all of the outer signposts fade away and you are standing in this uncertainty, like, what are you going to turn to consider your next step? What are you going to trust? And for me, the shift that was happening as I was deepening into being, a pilgrim was that release from looking to the outside world for my answers and to looking inwards for my answers and to trusting in that guidance. And I often wondered, had I not done that, would I have ever arrived to places of pilgrimage that were sacred? You may argue that, okay, Assisi, Padua, Venice, all right, everybody has heard of these places as places of pilgrimage. But for example, for me, Marian sites like Trsat in Croatia, or Medjugorje in Bosnia, or even Mariamana near Ephesus in Turkey, or Şanlıurfa, the ancient land of Ur and prophets like Abraham in Turkey. Would I have ever gone there if I tried to do this by myself? Of course not. I know the answer is no. And I know how much I would have lost had I not allowed, this ancient knowing to truly trace the path that it knew that I needed to walk. And this is what I really feel that pilgrims are being called to return to, to listen to that inner guide, to that ancient wisdom, and let it lead. And, for me, for the longest time, I really thought that the answers I was looking for, the peace, the love and all of that was somehow out there, in that holy place that I would visit, and that somehow it would whisper all of its secrets to me. And, you know, they whispered all right, but I didn't get it. I didn't hear what they were saying. And it was not until, you know, long after Santiago, long after Jerusalem, that I finally understood, you know, the temple that I most needed to honor and to visit really was the one inside my own heart. You know, this is the place where, you know, all the love and the peace and everything that I was seeking was all along. But I had to go on the journey. I had to make that pilgrimage, just like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. She had to go on that trip to realize she had everything inside of her. And, you know, kind of for me, as a kind of a final thought, I find it an amazing synchronicity that at this specific time of great uncertainty, the holy doors at the cathedral in Santiago are open for this year and for next year. And as, you know, magnificent as I know that is for many pilgrims, what to me it says is like the holy doors to our inner temples are just wide open now. They're flung wide open and they're inviting us to kind of step in and go explore in there, go kneel at the altar of the all that is holy and all that is sacred here and say yes, and accept this inner transformation to love that wants to take place. Because that's the transformation that for me is what is taking place inside the heart of every pilgrim who goes on pilgrimage. Because as we're transformed, obviously, in heart and mind, so then do we go out and transform the world as pilgrims in the world. And so for me, I take a very personal, very transformative view of what is being a pilgrim and the calling to return inwards to what is sacred, to what is ancient, and to listen to that. And I think it ties in nicely to what you were saying, Matthew, about the pilgrimages from the Indigenous people, and you as well, George, around exploring kind of beyond just the simple definition and, you know, and looking at the meaning of community. Was it you, George, or was it you, Matthew? Matthew, maybe both. But do we want to go a little bit more into being this pilgrim, but beyond just the Camino? You know, what does that, can you be is that a pilgrim? Like you were asking, George, you know, when we gather in groups that love, that have a common interest, is that also a pilgrim? If you go climb the mountain and you get together as a group, is that being a pilgrim? Is that, and I resist that word, authentic? Is that an authentic pilgrim?
George, are you going to say, I was going to say on the Camino, I had a very interesting experience about authentic, of course, which was the first time I walked on the Camino. I had snapped my Achilles tendon playing basketball about 6 weeks before scheduled departure. Something like that. And so when I landed in Spain with a group of students, I had a cast and a boot cast, and I was supposed to be walking a few hundred kilometers. But what I did in the end was I would walk with my students a couple of kilometers and then go back and then take a bus to the next village and wait for them. And I'd walk a kilometer or so out and then meet them and walk just the last little bit in. It was very disappointing. And yet it was interesting because I met a German pilgrim, young German woman, along the way who was just flat. Some of you who have maybe in the CCoP have had this experience where the blisters just were too much. And this poor young woman was weeping by the side of the road. And what happened was that a few students of my students said, you know, let us take your pack and we'll walk with you. And she said, no, no, no. She said, I have to carry my pack myself or I'm not an authentic pilgrim. And then several of them would turn to me along the way and say, it's really too bad you can't walk all the way to Santiago because you're not a real pilgrim. And I thought, for most of history, and George, from, you know, with his experience of studying medieval Christian pilgrimages and knowing them so well, would know that my status as an injured person, a person who had you know, who was in need of healing, obvious physical healing, we're always in need of healing, but obvious physical healing at that point, qualified me as a pilgrim as in many, many ways. And so the definitions have changed in that. And the term authentic is a bit of a trap, I think, for us, you know. I don't know, George, you said something about bonding versus integrative aloneness, and I really liked that. I wondered if you wanted to say more about that.
Sure. And again, to lift everyone out of their, I think, misplaced modesty. We've, you know, some of you here for the CCoP have not done the Camino yet. Others have only done the Camino. But one thing I share with my other guests today is that we've done a lot of pilgrimages in different times, territories, traditions, and they're all pilgrimage. But what we've gotten to experience on the Camino de Santiago, I think, is authentic in a way that we've committed ourselves to it, that we've opened ourselves up to an experience. Almost exactly 1 year ago, I was in Israel, speaking in Jerusalem and Galilee and Haifa about the Camino de Santiago. And it's interesting because Israelis know that they're accidentally myopic about pilgrimage because everybody comes to them. We go to the Holy Land to go on pilgrimage. And they have the best tour guides in the world, I think, who know how to shift gears and veer to allow for the quest in the guest, is the phrase that they use. That is to say, they listen in on the group to see what they're looking for, and then they tailor their tour to help people find what they're looking for. And yet, when they look at the Camino de Santiago, they're wondering, well, how do you people monetize this? I mean, who's making the money after all? And I kept telling them, it's not the point. Yeah, we spend something. Yeah, we buy some souvenirs. We have a good meal when we get to Santiago and some extra hot showers before we fly home. And the euphoria on arrival is universal in history, in culture. But that doesn't undermine our openness to be touched by things. And one of the things I tell people to remember is that we're always on a sliding scale between, say, tourism and pilgrimage. And frankly, listen, guys, it's easy to be a tourist and never be a pilgrim. But it's really tough to be a pilgrim and never be a tourist. And we should forgive ourselves for it, buying a few souvenirs, enjoying some extra good meals, using what transportation is available. It's our willingness to be touched by the experience, to be opened up by it, that I think makes us better pilgrims. And I think having been touched by that on the Camino de Santiago, we're great resources for other people, no matter what pilgrimage they take. Mony.
Yeah, George, Matthew, did you want to add to that? I see that you, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that having that sort of experience on the Camino that George was talking about, I've heard him say before, and you certainly were talking about, and the fact of the Canadian Company of Pilgrims is all about the fact that we do this in a group. We do this, there's an interesting thing going on because I don't know if you noticed, but in the slideshow at the very, very beginning and the photo contest, there were beautiful, absolutely stunning photos before the meeting started. But most of them were the same kind of photos that I took on the Camino and that I've taken elsewhere, which are a photo of the one person, the pilgrim, standing against a vast landscape. There were some other photos, but a lot of the photos were of that genre of the one pilgrim standing at the beginning of the trail. And yet our experience is a lot more like Mony, you said, the Wizard of Oz. I mean, Dorothy doesn't arrive at Emerald City by herself, you know, and she only makes it because of this ragtag group, you know, the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and so on. And when everybody who's been on the Camino or wants to go on the Camino, and all of the people, I'm sure, in the Canadian Company of Pilgrims know that we may frame it sometimes as a solitary, heroic journey. But in fact, it's a company of pilgrims, and part of that transformative experience that George was just talking about comes about because of those other people who change our lives, who change our perspectives, who walk with us into that horizon that's in those photos.
There's no question. I mean, I can speak for myself. You know, I may have started out on the quest by myself, but there is no way that I could have made it all the way without experiencing all the people who would step in along the way to support me in ways that truly often left me in tears. And you think, and it's often just a simple act of kindness. It's, you know, not big, you know, heroic things that they do, but often, you know, the taking you in when you have nowhere to sleep, or offering you a hot cup of coffee when you're just soaking wet. And so it allows for what is, I think, the truth of the human heart to reveal itself. And this is something that that maybe we think is only exclusive on the Camino. Is it? Do you believe that it's only there that we experience this kind of goodness and this, I can't find the word, we're together, that we're in this together, this sense of, it's not just me, it's all of us. And this is an opportunity for all of us to be growing. Yeah.
You know, that's
George.
certainly true. And one of the things that excites me about taking young undergraduates on the Camino de Santiago is the difference in this study abroad experience. There's not a campus in Canada or the United States that doesn't have some sort of service program where you travel out to a community and do some sort of service or volunteer work. A lot of American kids go to Central America or Haiti and they help with a water system. Frankly, they visit an orphanage, they get their picture taken for Facebook. It only augments and solidifies the power differential between those who can help and those who receive. And on the Camino de Santiago, we're invited to reverse that relationship. We become the conspicuous object of charity for others, and letting ourselves experience that and step into that role, that we are the ones receiving kindness from others, I think is part of the transformation that we experience and that I so treasure. Matthew, you may have had that experience too, when you were in need on the Camino. And Mony too, when you were in need on your travels. Being in need, visibly in need, and yielding to that rather than putting up my barriers as an independent Westerner, I think transforms us. And it's one of the things that I treasure on my experience of pilgrimage.
Yeah. You know, I think I can, and I'll let you also speak, Matthew. I think one of the hardest things for me in the beginning, especially with the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, because I appreciate what you're saying about having this kind of independent, Western mind that I can do this by myself and I've just got to, just do it all. The trying to receive kindness was actually very hard. I didn't realize how hard it was to allow someone to do something good for me, to offer me that. And I would always say, no, it's okay. Oh, I don't need that. I don't know, I'm okay. And I realized there is a great joy in allowing another to also give, just as much as there is a great power of transformation, like you said, George. It's a healing, transformative thing to say, you know what? I'm also in a moment of vulnerability, because that's what it is. We're vulnerable. When we're asking for help, we're vulnerable, and no one wants to kind of expose their underbelly, right? But how can we grow? How can we understand and see what is truly in the heart of another if we don't allow that to happen? So this idea of being vulnerable and learning to receive kindness is something that I think Pilgrims, is universal. I think it's a universal human trait, whether you're, on the Camino or not, is that. Yeah, Matthew? Yeah,
absolutely. I think again about all of the times, and everybody will have stories. Everybody who's taken a pilgrimage will have stories about, and I know, Mony, that you have a million wonderful stories about how you were, how you were welcomed in communities on the way to Jerusalem. But certainly, whether it was in Iceland or across that landscape behind George, and similar to that in southern Saskatchewan, the way people will sometimes just bring you water. When we were walking across Saskatchewan, we had to carry all of our water, and you lose liters a day. And there was just no place, there are no villages, there's nothing. And to have somebody drive out in a half-ton truck and give you some water as you're walking, it's just incredible. And that tells us that being vulnerable is a place of growth, as you said, it really is. I'm thinking about the Indigenous writers that I've read who talk about land and story and relation. And it's the relationship that land, story, and relation. And it's interesting that they talk about this as and it is very much as a sort of an Indigenous, all my relations, or the story, or the land, how important this is for Indigenous thinking. But in fact, in medieval Christian pilgrimage, land, the shrine, story, the hagiography, or the story of the saint, or the shrine, or St. James, and the stories we make as we are Camino pilgrims or other thing, land story and our relationships with others, how we become vulnerable and require help from other people, but also how we work with other pilgrims, how we learn from the company of pilgrims, the Canadian company of pilgrims, or some other company on the way to Spain. So land story and relationship, it's interesting. I've learned about this from the indigenous writers, but it really is a Camino. I mean, it really is a pilgrim learning as well, I think.
So how does, I wanted to ask you this because I'm fascinated by this idea of indigenous pilgrimages, because obviously they were here long before any of us were. And so of course they would have their sacred sites. Of course they would have their rituals and their wanting to go explore beyond just the physical. And I'm wondering, Matthew, if they somehow refined or expanded your definition of what you consider being a pilgrim or on pilgrimage.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, for one thing, in Canada, if you are traveling any great distance, we always were on foot because we're pilgrims formed by the Camino, by other pilgrimages like that. But a lot of travel, frankly, through what is now Canada has been done on by canoe. And so the Jesuits, for instance, when they recently did a reconciliatory pilgrimage, did most of it by canoe. And that's true pretty much across the country, where canoes were the primary way of travel in a lot of cases, or sometimes horseback. But canoe. George wrote an article about a horse pilgrimage and talked about that, the Lakota, which I think was a horse pilgrimage. Am I right, George?
Yes, it is. It's a midwinter horseback ride as a rite of initiation to adulthood for the Lakota in North and South Dakota. And it's on horseback. It's often in traditional dress. It's midwinter to end at Wounded Knee at the anniversary date of the massacre there. But we could think of pilgrimage now in our own day as a choreography, as a dance with changing partners. And sometimes you lead and sometimes you follow. But it's dancing together in harmony, in an embrace, sometimes as guest, sometimes as host, that I think makes for a richer experience of pilgrimage.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I see that Lee has popped in I think to let us know that we are at our time limit. And so, yeah, I know that there is so much more that we can talk about and so many more questions that I have. But I do want to give, obviously, those who are patiently watching us a chance to also ask their questions. So Lee, if there's a question that you want to ask us or the panel.
Great, thank you. What a treat it is to hear the three of you talking. I will invite our members to type any questions that they might have into the Q&A panel. We do have a question here. Do you sense a renewed spirit as pilgrims are given an opportunity to get back to walking the Camino, knowing that they've been quarantined for a long period of time? Anybody wants to take that?
Well, the fact that we're here and how many people are here right now, we were at 170, I think, at some point. I believe that the spirit of wanting to go on pilgrimage is still strong. I think there is that sense. Obviously, we all want to feel this feeling of being on pilgrimage. But again, I ask, what is it that you're truly drawn to do as a pilgrim? That's it. That would be my only consideration. George, Matthew.
The marketing people will talk about pent-up demand for product. I just think of a longing to rejoin the community or to sample a community you've only heard about or experience through extension. This is a community. None of us ever actually walks alone, even if you leave your cell phone and your iPad back home. You carry a community that sent you forth. You meet a community along the way. You rejoin a community when you come home, or a community gathers around you because of what you've done on pilgrimage. So a renewed sense of longing for that which we've once experienced and would like to experience again. Sure, there's a pent-up demand for product. It's more than product, it's experience.
Yeah, experience. How about you, Matthew? Is there something you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I completely agree with everything George has just said. I would say, in addition, that the pandemic is an opportunity as well as a barrier for us. And what the opportunity is to look at the land around us, wherever we're cooped up, and to say, what makes this land sacred? What makes this land special? Yeah. And everyone who's been on the Camino, or we know from the Canadian Company of Pilgrims, or all of us, it often, not everybody on the Camino is well off, but quite often there are people, I mean, in order to take a month off of work, in order to spend, you know, $50 a day or so, there aren't always, it's not, the Camino does have all kinds and all types of people, but there is maybe, there are a lot of people who look like me on the Camino, I'll just say that. Maybe the pandemic is giving us a chance to look around and say, what's local around us right now, and how might that open it up to youth who can't always go unless they're a part of George's class or my class at Concordia or something, people with lower incomes perhaps, or traditionally less represented groups on the Camino. You know, how can those people also, how can we have a pilgrim experience with them? Mm-hmm. And so it's a very cool opportunity in some ways.
You know, I love that. You know, I love the idea of exploring, because you're right, you know, unless you have a certain, you know, socioeconomic, let's be clear, you know, to take a plane across the ocean and go spend the money that you're spending to walk on pilgrimage, and to have that kind of time. It does reduce the, you know, kind of the market, if you will, for those who are able to do it. But what does it mean if we're able to really expand the possibility for others who may not have experienced pilgrimage in the way that we define it? Because let's be clear, every culture, every society has its pilgrimages, its sacred sites, its sacred stories. And so how can we be more enriched as we open ourselves to include all of these different means of what it means to understand, you know, the quest to understand the sacred, you know? So I love that. I love kind of exploring where we are, and just kind of getting out of maybe the very rigid definitions and the very rigid ideas that have been set around what it means to be a pilgrim, and allow maybe our hearts to kind of guide that a little bit more. Yeah, good, great, fantastic.
Great, thank you. We have a few questions coming in. One about but talking about being an authentic pilgrim. So one of our members asked, is there anything that you could say to that person? For example, in Matthew's story, was there anything that you said to the woman with the blisters about being an authentic pilgrim? Yeah,
I was probably too much of a university professor at that time, because I talked about the medieval experience of pilgrimage, and I talked about the fact that people who need healing are often, you know, I mean, a pilgrim is often somebody who needs external healing in some way. And so she was perfect. I said, you're a perfect pilgrim. And so that's what I said. I don't know how helpful it was, but that's what I said.
Yeah. George?
As a working medievalist, as Matthew keeps on pointing out, I want you to know I have the primary requirement for a successful medievalist, and that's a very high threshold of boredom. People, you know, I'm a specialist in medieval Spanish literature. People usually back away from me at cocktail parties. I don't blame them, but I've been famous 3 times in my life. Once, with the Y2K problem. Remember back in 1999 when all the computers were going to fail? Well, they wanted to know about the Y1K problem. Did people panic at the year 1000? The short answer is no, they didn't notice. The other time I've been famous is right now with the pandemic. What was it like in the Middle Ages? And frankly, a lot worse. The third time I've been famous, and it's been my most successful stint at it, is pilgrimage, because everybody's going on pilgrimage these days. You know how many people travel internationally as a primary or secondary reason for visiting a religious site, a sacred site across the world? We're talking 440 million people a year are going on a conscious pilgrimage. as a primary or secondary reason. You may be going for business, but you're going to stop and see the cathedral too, or a shrine site, or a temple, or cemetery. Those all count as pilgrimages. 440 million people a year. And the Camino de Santiago is still a sterling example of pure pilgrimage. We're not going to shop. We're not going just to eat. Oh, we will, but it's a uniquely pure, selfless investment of resources and ourselves to go on pilgrimage. I think it's just wonderful. Don't be modest.
So we have a great question that this will segue nicely into, and that is a question: can the experience of pilgrimage be hurt by tourism and commercialism?
I tend to be very forgiving on these things. Ireland launched a campaign a couple of years ago to promote internal pilgrimage, and they even said out loud and in public, it's in direct competition to the Camino de Santiago, because so many Irish were going to Spain to spend their money. And the folks in Spain went, fine. If they do Ireland first or Spain first, and they keep on going on pilgrimages, we all benefit. And that's true commercially, tourism dollars, but it's also good for the person going on any sort of pilgrimage. So I really don't mind when people travel for any reason.
And often, as George says, that there will be municipal governments that set up pilgrimages precisely in order to reinvigorate the economies of small places. I remember walking through Norway with a group of people, and this young man came running across a couple of hills to grab us, and he literally grabbed us and said, "Are you pilgrims?" And we said, "Yes." And he said, "Great, come with me." And then he dragged us over to this sort of makeshift thing, and it said Pilgrim Center or whatever, written almost like with paint, fresh paint on the top. And then he said, "Great." And then he sat us down and he fed us stuff. And I said, "How long have you been open?" And he said, "Today is our first day." and it had, that particular office was funded by a local municipality in Norway. And it was done as a way of saying, how can we reinvigorate the economy? I mean, it's what the Canadian Company of Pilgrims is doing by wanting to send money over for the albergues and the gîtes. These things, as George says, are linked, and always have been, frankly.
Yeah. And for me, I always look at it as a personal choice at the end of the day. If if you want to walk and only eat bread and cheese every single day, you don't want to participate in the menus, you don't want to participate in the restaurants, or only want to stay in the modest pilgrim accommodations, maybe you even just want to camp out. I don't know if that's still allowed anymore. Whatever experience you want to have, whatever it is that spirit is calling you to experience, that's fully within your control. There is nothing that demands you to go have a pilgrim meal or go sleep, in these, paid for accommodations. So we somehow, I think, give too much power to what is happening outside and say, wait a minute, I can participate in whatever it is that calls me to participate in. Maybe some days actually, and I did this every whatever week or 10 days on the Camino, I actually stayed in a really nice hotel because I wanted privacy and a hot shower. And so I think, again, we come back to a lot of expectations and a lot of ideas that we have around what it means to be a pilgrim and what it means to support pilgrims. And I think that's maybe the biggest barrier to truly experiencing what it is that what calls you to pilgrimage wants you to experience. Yeah.
No, this is the last thing I say, it might be the best. Frankly, I'll confess that we used to say when we were cranky with the tourists, well, today's tourist is tomorrow's pilgrim. I think that's wrong. Today's tourist is today's pilgrim. Invite them to be a pilgrim, and they will step up to another level. They don't have to, but it's important for us as pilgrims to invite them to be pilgrims too, to welcome them as pilgrims. And if they would like to accept that invitation, they may.
Yeah, because otherwise we keep that barrier of separation. That somehow I'm more authentic, I'm more of a pilgrim, and all of the labels just keep the separation, whereas the experience of pilgrimage is meant to bring us back to understanding that we are one and we are connected and we are here for each other. So yeah. I love that.
it's a big tent. It's a big definition.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah.
I have a question that's from one of our members directed at Matthew, which is wondering where in southern Saskatchewan we were talking about.
I helped initiate a trail in 2015 on what, if you're from Saskatchewan, you may know as the Northwest Mounted Police Patrol Trail, which is from Wood Mountain to Cypress Hills or Fort Walsh. It's also known as the Traders Road because it was a Métis or Michif trail before the Northwest Mounted Police got there. But also from Mortlach, which is just outside of Moose Jaw, if you know where that is, some people, south to Gravelburg. And it was interesting because that was our most obviously traditional pilgrimage, because Gravelburg is actually a cathedral and it is a site of pilgrimage. But interestingly, it was also the one where we had the most Indigenous participation, even though it was not an Indigenous trail, it was actually a settler trail. So those two in southern Saskatchewan also walked from Swift Current to Battleford. And Battleford, a lot of Canadians do not know that Battleford is a little bit like George talked about the Lakota ride. Battleford is the site of the largest mass hanging in Canadian history, and I think it was 8 men, all Indigenous, were hung after the rebellion. Yeah, in 1885, and so we walked that as well from Swift Current north on the Battleford Trail.
That must have been, I must say, it's powerful just listening to it, but I'm sure. It must have been healing in some way. Did you find that it was in some way healing a part of maybe an ancestral wound or something ancestral that our past, that has been done in our name, maybe in the past? How did you find that?
Definitely. By the way, I said rebellion because I had forgotten the term resistance. That's the term, actually. That's a much better term for what happened. Yes, we had Indigenous participants who would normally smudge us every morning on the walks. And it was interesting that as we walked, we learned, especially walking north from Swift Current to Battleford, we were walking in the footsteps of General Otter and the troops who had been mustered for the only war on Canadian soil against a local population, a large-scale war, which was the resistance. And it was interesting, as we learned the stories and walked, we did feel a sense of integration. I mean, it was terrible. It was a terrible time in some ways. It was the last days of the Bushi of the case there, which a lot of Canadians will know about. But it was revealing for those of us who were not Indigenous. And I have to say, our Indigenous, the people who walked with us or were with us, were the most gracious people. We stayed one night in Red Pheasant First Nation, right in the middle of that whole time when the verdict was being pronounced. We were right there on the First Nation. It was quite a fraught time, I would say. But we learned so much, exactly as you said.
Imagine all the healing and reconciliation that would take place if we here in Canada, or even in the United States or anywhere, would walk the land around us, as you say, Matthew, and truly understand the history where we've come from and how we can be part of the healing that the land and that we all need, so that we can all move forward as, brothers and sisters, So I love that. Thanks.
We learned the real stories, and that's a good part of it, whether it's in Spain or in the United States or in Canada or wherever we might be.
Because it is about healing. All of it is about, healing. It's about reconciliation so that we can walk together as one. So, all right.
We have just time for one last question, and Mony, we'll throw this to you. Easy question to answer for you. The question is, have you written a book about a walk to Jerusalem?
I'm not going to answer that. I don't do promotion on public forums like this. No, I'm not going to answer that.
Just an answer to say that yes, she has, and it's a wonderful.
Yes, she has. But thank you. Thank you for asking the question. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
That wasn't a plant either. That
very kind. Thank you.
But speaking of that, and I think we will draw this Q&A session to a close so that we can thank our speakers and send them on their way. But I did want to mention that that we do have some resources with links to the various websites and podcasts and book sites and so forth of our three speakers, which we will make available to everybody who participated today as an attendee. And oh my goodness, what a rich and uplifting conversation this has been to send us on our way. And I really want to extend heartfelt thanks on behalf of everybody who's listening to today's panelists and presenters. George, Matthew, and Mony, you've given us a lot to think about. And as a token of our thanks, and as soon as our new Holy Year's badges are off the press, we will be sending each one of you a badge as a memento of this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's very thoughtful.
Very
Thank
kind.
you.
Thank you.
And members, please note that we will be sharing this a video version on our website and our YouTube channel, and along with the document that I mentioned that has links to some of the resources that our speakers mentioned today. So to all of you, our members across the country and beyond, thank you for attending this year's annual general meeting, and buen camino, everybody.
Buen camino.
Buen camino.
Camino.
Bye.